For more discussion on the result of the South China Sea arbitration, we are joined in our studio by Professor Zhu Feng, Executive Director of the China Center for Collaborative Studies of the South China Sea from Nanjing University. And also in Bonn, we are joined by Professor Stefan Talmon, who is the Director of the Institute of Public International Law at the University of Bonn. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. First of all, I would like to get immediate comment from both of you about the award coming from the arbitration. Professor Talmon, your view here.
I think the award is really amazing. I haven't had, of course, a chance to read the more than 500 pages of this award, but I think it will be a groundbreaking award that will go down in international legal history, both for its substance and for its procedure, but it will go down probably for all the wrong reasons. It will be not a beacon for the international rule of law, but it will be a sign of a tribunal having misjudged the situation it was called to rule upon.
Very strong opinion coming, Professor Talmon. What do you think, Professor Zhu?
I think the awarding is really jokingly surprising me, because I couldn't imagine how partial and unfair it is, because it's not just to make up some sort of reality, but also misjudging some sort of a very conceivable evidence. For example, the ruling also, just as I mentioned, some sort of aggravation of the friction in the South China Sea. It's some sort of sign of, we say, politicization by a number of the judges or arbiters. So that's very ridiculous.
Okay, we have already, both of you talked. Some viewers might ask us, why don't you have some Filipino scholars as well in this discussion? By the way, we have been working very hard over the past one day to contact all the Filipino guests who ever appeared on our show. Apparently, they are all having other commitments. Having said that, though, let me come back to you, Professor Talmon, to have some specifics. What do you make of what some believe as this award sweepingly sided with the Filipino side? Do you agree with that kind of judgment?
Yes, I think it is. It is really startling and amazing that this is a war that is going totally into one side's direction. I've hardly ever seen such a ruling. You could say this is a ruling almost 98% going in the Philippines' direction. There is no balance, and I also think this one-sided ruling does not really meet the complexity of the case. There is hardly a case where there is a clear black and white situation, but the ruling really gives the impression that there is a black and white world out there in the South China Sea, and it seems to be that China is being allocated the black part, and the Philippines is allocated the white part in this scenario.
Professor Talmon, some would say, well, the Chinese did not participate in the proceedings at all, and therefore they probably will be the black part, quote unquote.
That is probably true. I think this is one of the questions one would have to ask. If the tribunal would have decided in any other way, if China had actively participated in the case. But of course, the tribunal has taken note of some of China's positions and still has reached, in my view, the wrong conclusions. It has still misinterpreted in a way China's position, for example, on the question of the territorial sovereignty over the island groups in the South China Sea. I think not much could have been gained with China being present in the courtroom. It would still have made the same declaration as it made in its foreign ministry's statement.
Professor Zhu, your view here, sweepingly sided with the Filipino side, or not really?
Of course, it's a reality. So then that's also very appalling reality we could easily figure out from this award. We say, what's the international arbitration? First of all, it should just keep some delicate balance between the different sides. Second, it also should be very solid reflection of some sort of, we say, such a contending arguments, rather than just unbelievably and overwhelmingly leaning towards one side. To be honest, I don't care how favorable or unfavorable from this awarding, but we need a justice. We need a fairness. But I couldn't find any such a words, any such a meaning from this award. So I have to say it's completely a consequence of a politicization.
Okay. Professor Talmon, let's just be very professional. I know you have been over the past few minutes. Let's continue to be that way. What does this mean, this precedence from this arbitration, the award? How much impact and implication would they have for other territorial disputes between countries, among countries? Particularly with the fact this time reefs have become the most significant issue in judging about territorial disputes. If that is the case, what would that mean for all the other countries who have territories on the sea? Many would ask this very significant question. Professor Talmon.
I think this is a groundbreaking judgment, not just for China and the Philippines, but for the whole international community. It will have reverberations well beyond this very dispute, and it will affect the territorial claims of many other states. We could say maritime boundaries will have to be redrawn after this decision, because many of the islands on the basis of which states have made claims to maritime entitlements will no longer be accepted as islands that generate these maritime entitlements. So this will have effects for many states, including the United States, Canada, but also Japan and other states in Southeast Asia.
And what would that mean? Will others take advantage of this award and file similar territorial disputes requests like the Philippines to whatever the special arbitration? And what kind of situation would that be, Professor Talmon, eventually?
I think what we have at the moment is the pronouncement of the arbitral tribunal. We will have to see how the international community reacts to this decision. We have seen many decisions by international tribunals before where states, the international community, have not accepted a particular ruling and have acted contrary to that ruling. So I would suspect that many states will not accept the tribunal's ruling on the status of islands and low tide elevations. I cannot see the United States or Canada, or for that reason Japan, change its legal views, which it has held for many years, and give up territorial claims in various sea areas. So what I would say is we will have to wait and see how states react to this ruling and whether they will abide by this ruling. Because, of course, many of the pronouncements made by the tribunal are of a general nature that will also affect other states.
Right. The UNCLOS itself, as we mentioned many times, have the issue of whether it should have jurisdiction over the sovereignty when it comes to these kind of special arbitrations. Having said that, though, talking about attitudes coming from relevant parties. After the ruling was issued, the Chinese Foreign Ministry, on behalf of the Chinese government, responded immediately with a statement. Let's take a look at this, declaring that China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea shall under no circumstances be affected by those awards. China opposes and will never accept any claim or action based on those awards. End of quote. That is the statement coming from the Chinese Foreign Ministry representing the Chinese government right after the award came out. Professor Zhu, having said that though, what would this mean? That China's, first of all, no participation and no acceptance and no recognition of both the proceeding, now the award of this special arbitration?
Of course, I think China's position has been very consistent and very clear-cut. But the problem is, before the releasing of the awards, then probably there will be some sort of a suspicion about how desirable such a complete, the opposition will be. But after the releasing of the award, I think all the suspicion disappeared because faced with such a very, very, we say, misstructured and misplaced, international jurisdiction, I think that China not just lose the last theme of some sort of, we say, respect to the tribunal, but also I think it's become some sort of a very big, the fear of the future's, territorial disputes in South China Sea. Because if no one could have found any justifiable trade, then why we should put the trust on this tribunal system?
I see. Very interesting. Having said that, though, Professor Talmon, let me come back to you. What do you make of it? One party of those territorial disputes between this time, apparently China and the Philippines, is not even accepting the award. Does that make the award relevant? And in the future, does that make any award coming from these kind of special arbitration relevant?
I think, of course, tribunals have to be judged by their rulings. And at the end of the day, especially a tribunal that has no means of enforcing its awards, will have to convince states by the quality of its judgment. Now, if a judgment cannot convince the international community, it will be without effect, especially, as I said, there is no enforcement mechanism. It will depend on the quality of the reasoning, and it will also depend on to what extent the award can contribute to the settlement of the dispute that is before the tribunal.
Lastly, before we go, Professor, how are we going to make sure that our international legal system and international legal mechanism will be immune as much as possible? We can't say 100%, but as much as possible from now in the future to political and geopolitical manipulations. What does it take?
I think it will be very, very difficult to prevent such situations from reoccurring. There have always been states that have used and abused the legal system to further their own political aims. And I don't think that we can do much about this. What we can do is, especially as academics, if we see a wrong or a bad reasoned judgment, we can point that out to the international community and can show the flaws in such rulings so that the ruling itself will be of little effect in the international legal sphere.
Professor Zhu, briefly?
Of course, presumably we should just trust the arbiter or such a judge of the tribunal will maintain the integrity. But actually, I have to say, the ruling is a bigger disaster, and they really disgraced for their professionalism.
With that, we are coming to the end of the first part of our discussion. We have to bid goodbye to Professor Stefan Talmon, who are talking to us about the legal expert's perspective. Thank you so much, Professor Talmon from the University of Bonn. And Professor Zhu, you want to stay with us for the latter part of discussion. There is a third party, as they say, in this China-Philippine dispute that we cannot ignore. Many have been pointing their fingers to the United States, one of the most vocal countries urging China to hew to arbitration. Is still an outlier to the UNCLOS, to which more than 160 countries are part. Let's take a look.
With the excuse of freedom of navigation and overflight, the U.S. military and some certain countries have conducted close-in maneuvers in the waters and airspace of China's Nanhaizhudao Islands and reefs. A U.S. military vessel once entered the waters around China's Nanhaizhudao Islands, which are part of China's inherent territory. The U.S. has officially embraced a pivot to Asia strategy since 2009. And Philippine policymakers have suggested that the country is under pressure from Washington to find issues with China. But China, which has long been pushing a new model of major power relationship, suggests that Asia and the Pacific region are big enough for all.
And now we have both Professor Zhu Feng from Nanjing University with us in the Beijing studio, and also Dean Cheng joining us from Washington, D.C. in the U.S. Mr. Cheng is a senior research fellow at the Asia Studies Center of the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at Heritage Foundation. Welcome to our program, Mr. Cheng. First of all, I would like to begin by asking both of you, gentlemen, one simple question. How should all sides react to the award? We have communicated with our audience earlier. We tried to contact all the Filipino experts. We have already tried before, but none of them could be available for this. So I would like to ask you, Professor Zhu, for this. We heard from the Filipino foreign minister who said that the Philippines would use two words, call for sovereignty and also restraint regarding the award. What is your understanding coming from the Filipino side?
Of course, I think I really appreciate the dictator governments and for some sort of a self-restraint. It's very, very important. For this critical moment, I also hope all the parties, including China, we could also be just not overreacting, and a self-restraint is absolutely important because no one can benefit from the escalating of the tension in South China Sea.
I see. What about you, Mr. Cheng? We understand the U.S. Aircraft carrier is still patrolling in the South China Sea. Is it still going to be their mission? The mission is still going to continue? What would that mean for all parties?
Well, the mission of the U.S. Navy has always been preserving freedom of the seas. And I don't see this particular arbitration decision as affecting that. But it's useful to note here that we are also in the middle of the RIMPAC exercises, to which China was invited and is attending. And in fact, China has 5 ships currently participating in the RIMPAC exercises. So I don't think that this is quite as black and white as some would like to portray it.
On the other hand, Professor Zhu, we heard from the Chinese President Xi Jinping after the award came out. China did not recognize, would not participate, now would not accept the award. But he also said this: China has been a guardian of international rule of law and fairness and justice. We're always adhere to the path of peaceful development. What do you think will China react? Because the earlier drill already come to an end on Monday, one day before the ruling comes out. So what do you think should be the reaction coming from the Chinese side?
Of course, now the China become some sort of, we say, a very diversified country. There's a lot of views and counter views. So for the moment, I really hope the President Xi's remarks is not just some sort of a reminder for Chinese people, but also to international community. On the one hand, I think his remark is very strongly showcasing some sort of China's unshakable resolve to safeguard the sovereignty. But on the other hand, he also emphasizing that China should abide by the international law. But the problem is the tribunal award is really, really out of your imagination. It's some sort of very remarkable and a notorious partiality is really out of any scope the Chinese could feel soft about that.
Mr. Cheng, having said that, what would that mean? Can you hear us clearly, Mr. Cheng?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you. What does that mean? The whole award itself, and now you see the diplomacy seem to be brewing, yet no one knows which direction it would take. So, what do you think could be the constructive role the U.S. could play?
Well, the U.S. has long stood, as you've already noted, for calling for arbitration. The arbitration decision has come down. The Filipino government has said that it is interested in holding discussions, and in this regard, it would be very useful for the Manila government to clarify exactly where it's coming down on the issue of what exactly it wants to pursue. But I think the important thing here is for this to reopen discussions. I think part of the issue here, and this is, I think, part of what has come out of the arbitration, is that when you are not present, arbitration continues to go forward. What has happened is that China has unfortunately, in a sense, forfeited or abdicated its role in the arbitration proceedings.
But the question is now the arbitration already come out with an award. The question is how parties would react. I think now this is the most important question. So may I follow up by asking you, of course you are coming from an expert's perspective, should Washington and will Washington exert pressure to Manila for getting down to more issues with China in terms of territorial disputes once the award comes out?
I think as the U.S. has expressed in the past, the U.S. is more than happy to offer its good offices to promote discussion among all of the claimants. This is not just a Filipino decision. This is a decision that affects all of the people, all of the nations that are making claims over the South China Sea. This affects Vietnam's claims, this affects Malaysia's claims, as well as obviously China's claims, and even the Taiwan holdings on Ituaba.
All right, Professor Zhu, your response.
Okay, yes, I think Mr. Chen made the point, the U.S. backing the talks, but with the different or contending priority. For example, from China, China would like to have a bilateral one, but U.S. just pushing on a multilateral one. But we consider, for example, such a lingering territorial dispute probably should be better running through some sort of, we say, such a bilateral one. But on the other hand, we also see America's stance, of course, is very challenging Chinese. So then the deemed question is very important. U.S. is supported the talk, but the problems on what base, in what way?
Interesting. And will this, the award itself and the territorial disputes between China and the Philippines being flared up by some relevant parties, will this speed up the arms race or escalation of tensions and military buildup in the region? I think that is the ultimate question. That's the ultimate question that's likely to influence the peace and stability of the region. Mr. Cheng, your assessment here.
Well, I think that when we look at the military forces that are deployed and the military forces that are available, it is difficult to imagine how the Philippines, whose most modern warship is a 40-year-old ex-American Coast Guard cutter, is really in a position to challenge the People's Liberation Army Navy, which is one of the largest navies in the world and now has a new aircraft carrier and frankly has some of the most modern warships anywhere in the world. I think that it's important to sort of recognize the bilateral relations. I understand why Professor Zhu calls for this, why the Chinese Foreign Ministry calls for this. But the reality is that you have a remarkable mismatch between the kinds of capabilities that the Chinese military fields and that of any military in the region, certainly among the claimant states to the South China Sea.
All right, Professor Zhu, should everybody have the same kinds of militaries, the same numbers of missiles, the same kinds of aircraft carriers by all countries that are having territorial disputes in the region? Your answer here.
Yeah, I think such a asymmetrical strength is not China's some sort of, we say, mistake. So such a asymmetric, the mismatch probably is also some sort of, we say, intentions and also very, very negative. But the problem is, I also hope so the U.S. or China, for such a very critical moment, where most important the two players, we should cool down.
All right. I hope that will be the case. This will be the time for people to think at least for how diplomacy should work from day one, in fact, it should be. Thank you so much for all of your input, Professor Zhu Feng and also Mr. Dean Cheng. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us.